Okay, so we left off with that Treaty of Mendota. We look on our comprehension page, that is number 8. You should have all the other questions taken care of. So we're starting today with question number 8. Some Dakota feared they would be cheated by the treaties of Traverse des Sioux and Mendota. Did their fears become a reality? So that's a yes or no. And then it says explain your answer. Why did it or did it not become a reality? So let's listen to what they have to say about the Treaty of Mendota.
The Treaty of Mendota. 2 weeks after the Sisseton and Ouahpeton bands signed the treaty at Traverse des Sioux, the Made-Wakanton and Ouahpekute bands signed a similar treaty at Mendota. During the talks at Mendota, the U.S. government threatened to use force against the Dakota when they seemed reluctant to sign the treaty. Together, the two treaties required the Dakota to give up almost all their remaining lands in Minnesota, about 24 million acres. In exchange, the government promised to pay them more than $500,000 immediately, plus annuities of cash, food, and goods for the next 50 years. In addition, 2 permanent reservations of land along the Minnesota River were established where the Dakota could live forever.
So the Dakota were hesitant to sign it. We want to give up all this land, and we're not sure you're going to stick by the treaty, right? So it even says in the question, they feared they would be cheated by the United States. We don't trust you. You're not our relative. We don't know you well. We don't have that faith in you that you're going to follow through with it. But they end up signing it because why? Even though they didn't want to, why would they sign it, Eleanor?
They were threatening the U.S. government.
Because was it a balance of, were they balanced in their power?
No.
No, remember, the United States had more power, right? They had the bigger military, more people. So the Dakota were saying, oh goodness, if we don't sign it, they're just gonna take it and we get nothing. So, okay, I guess we'll sign it and we'll at least get the annuities and we'll get these reservations. So let's see what happens.
Nevertheless, the Dakota fears that they would be cheated were realized. The U.S. Senate changed the terms of the treaties so that the permanent reservations became temporary. Furthermore, as the Dakota had suspected, much of the first cash payment went directly to fur traders like Henry Sibley, who claimed the Dakota owed them for goods they had purchased in previous years.
So, instead of being a permanent reservation, this is our land forever, that word got changed to temporary. You're living here now, but we could always change it. We could always move you to somewhere else. It's not permanent anymore. Big difference. And the money that they were promised in those annuities went to the fur traders. We've talked about this because the fur traders were in debt. So instead of the Dakota getting the money and doing what they thought was right with the money, it just went directly to the fur traders. All right, let's go back to that yellow box on page 116. The legacy of treaties. So that number 9, the legacy of treaties. What did the U.S. Supreme Court's 1999 ruling in Minnesota versus Mille Lacs Band of Chippewa, or Ojibwe, mean for the Ojibwe? So these treaties that they were making back in the 1800s, some, like the Treaty of Mendota, said, well, for 50 years, we're going to give you annuities. Some treaties had the end date. Some just said, this is how it's going to be. And so that needs to continue on forever. So remember the Dakota were saying, we want a paper copy of this treaty. We want it written down so we can say, you promised us this. We're going to hold you to it. And we're going to pass that treaty down from generation to generation to generation to make sure you're following that treaty. This is where it comes back to say good move on the Ojibwe part for having it written down. So we're going to see what happens with those treaties. Maybe. Oy. Let's try this again.
So what? So what? The legacy of treaties. Does a treaty signed more than 150 years ago still matter? Many treaties signed between American Indian nations and the U.S. government remain in effect today. As long as that is the case, both sides are legally required to obey the terms of the treaty.
So if it said for 50 years we're gonna do this, after 50 years they don't have to keep doing it. But if it didn't have an end date on it, it still applies today. Today is 2024.
The reservation system. Most treaties in Minnesota created reservations on a small portion of the land purchased by the U.S. government. Reservations were pieces of land reserved specifically for the American Indian nation signing a treaty. This means that while that American Indian nation had exclusive rights to the land and the resources on it, they didn't outright own it. It was, and still is, a complicated arrangement.
So we read about, I think it was in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, the Dakota were saying, well, if we take the reservation land, we can live how we want to live. These settlers coming in live differently than us, and we don't want to live that way. That's not our way. Our way has worked for us for thousands of years. We want to continue it. So when we go to our reservation land, we're going to live our way, and it'll be okay. But the United States viewed it differently. So we're going to see where there's kind of a clash.
Goals for reservations. American Indians maintained sovereignty or control over their affairs on their reservations. They expected this land to be a place where they could live as they had traditionally, hunting, fishing, ricing, and planting their food. The U.S. government, however, considered reservations to be places where American Indians could learn to farm and live like American settlers. This conflict strained relations between American Indian nations and the government for many decades.
What did the U.S. government want the American Indians to do? Eleanor? What key term do we call that? Help her out, Amala. Assimilation. They're saying, yeah, you're moving to this reservation land, but you need to assimilate. Our lifestyle is better. Is it truly better? No, it's different. It works for us, because that's all that we know, right? So from our perspective, we say, yeah, this is how we want to live. But the American Indians had a different perspective. That's not how we want to live. We want to live in community, how we've always done. We don't want to own our own land. We have all this land that's Dakota land. It's for all Dakota. Whereas the U.S. is saying, no, you need to have your own farm where you can raise your crop, you can grow the crops and get your money for it, and you can earn your own money. So the U.S. is saying, no, you thought you were going to live on the reservation the way you've always lived. We're going to say, no, you need to change. And this is going to cause problems for the American Indians.
Reservations today. Many reservations and communities established through treaties still exist today. Tribal governments create laws on tribal lands that are enforced by tribal police forces. American Indian nations and the U.S. government continue to work closely with one another. This is because of the special relationship that exists between the sovereign nations that negotiated the treaties.
So up where my sister lives, she lives in Osage, it's by Park Rapids. She is a volunteer firefighter. And they go around and they're the firefighters for that whole area. Right next to Osage is a reservation. And I forget which one it is. I think it's Whiter, but I'm not positive. So there's a reservation right next to Osage. And sometimes when there's fires on the reservation, then they go and they help put out those fires. Because there's this relationship between the United States and the Ojibwe, that's the Ojibwe reservation, and they work together. So even though they're not Ojibwe, they go on to the Ojibwe land to help them. So there's this relationship between the tribal nation and the United States. And it's still around today. she lives right next to our reservation. Some reservations are no longer here, but some still are, that were set up back 150 years ago. Now this next part is what the question is about. So our question is about the Minnesota versus Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, the court ruling. So let's hear what they went to court about, what that has to do with us.
Ongoing debate, fishing rights. Disagreements still arise over how to interpret treaties today. Legal cases about treaty issues have gone all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the United States. One such case was Minnesota versus Mille Lacs Band of Chippewa, 1999. In this case, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that Ojibwe from the Mille Lacs Reservation could continue to hunt and fish in their traditional ways on lands they had ceded or turned over in an 1837 treaty with the United States. Language in the treaty reserved the right of the Ojibwe to hunt and fish traditionally, even when they were off the reservation.
So 160 years later, it still applies. There wasn't an end date on the treaty. What is the traditional way for the Ojibwe to hunt and fish? Adeline? Yeah, so when they were fishing, they would use spears. They would even use big nets that they would use to catch the fish. With the hunting, they were using bows and arrows. Think back to those posters we made. Think back to the cycle, year in the life of the Ojibwe. When would they do fishing? Bridget? Only in the winter? All the seasons, right? They did ice fishing in the winter, but they fished in the spring, they fished in the summer, they definitely fished in the fall because they were smoking those fish to help them get through the winter. They fished all year round. Do we fish all year round?
Yes.
How many of us here have ever gone fishing in a boat in the summertime? What do you need to go fishing? What important legal thing do you need to go fishing? Liam? So you need supplies, but what legal thing do we need to go fishing, Harper?
Fishing license.
A fishing license, right? When do we start fishing? In April, could I go out and go fishing?
Maybe. Yeah.
It depends. Oh, hold on, doesn't depend. It's a yes or no question. Can I go out fishing in April?
Yes. No, you can't go fishing.
Who said no? Why can I not go fishing in April?
It was just a guess.
Adeline was right. Who can figure out why Adeline was right? Why can I not go fishing in April? Aiden? Why me, as the Caucasian white settled person, right? Why can I not go fishing in April? Bridget?
Because your license has expired.
When is that license good for?
One season of the year.
One season. What season? When does the fishing season start? The fishing opener.
Oh, I should be right.
Harvard?
I think summer.
Certain time every year. Fishing opener. Always what weekend?
Memorial Day.
Before that.
Fishing weekend.
Yeah, it is fishing weekend. It's also Mother's Day weekend.
Oh.
Usually it's fishing opener and Mother's Day. I don't know if it's every year they occur on the exact same weekend, but a lot of times that fishing opener is Mother's Day weekend. So before Mother's Day weekend, before the fishing opener, can I go fishing?
No.
There's ice fishing in the winter. Can I go ice fishing in April?
No.
No, because there's no ice, and if there is ice, it's too thin. There is a certain point in time where they say all the ice houses need to be off the ice because it gets dangerous. Fishing's done when we can't be on the ice. And then we have to wait for the fishing opener so we can go out in our boats or go off and fish off the dock. So if it's not fishing season, we can't go fishing. Do the Dakota and the Ojibwe have a fishing season?
No.
No, they fished all year long. Adeline?
Once I went ice fishing in the winter, and the ice was like so thick that you could drive cars.
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's why in April, if there's ice on the water, we will not go on it because it won't hold the car. We don't want to worry about it holding us. Yes.
I thought before fishing season you could go fishing for like crappies, but like you couldn't keep them.
You can't keep them.
Yeah.
Right. Can the Dakota keep what they catch?
Yes.
Yes. Yep, so if you're fishing, you can't keep it, so we don't really count it, right? Because it has to be, you can catch your limit, it's the season of it. The Dakota and the Ojibwe don't have limits, they don't have seasons, they can fish whenever, and they can use spears. I can't go spear fishing, because I am not an American Indian. So I'm not protected to be able to go spear fishing. American Indians, that's their traditional way of fishing. They're gonna go. Let's listen to this last paragraph.
Over time, the state of Minnesota passed laws that restricted the rights of the Ojibwe to hunt and fish using traditional methods. The Supreme Court ruled that the state of Minnesota had to follow the terms of the 1837 treaty. Years after the court decision, many people on both sides of this issue still have strong feelings. Why do treaties matter?
Why can't I go spear fishing? Why can't you go spear fishing?
Unsafe.
It's not that it's unsafe. I mean, you could argue that any type of hunting or fishing would be unsafe. Why are there these laws? It's not just laws against the Dakota and the Ojibwe, it's all of us. They're saying this is the Minnesota law, you can't do this, and you live in Minnesota. Why do we have these laws, Eleanor?
Because, it's like what?
Poaching?
No, I don't think she's meaning poaching. We're gonna pause.
Good afternoon, students. These are your Friday afternoon announcements. I have two positive office referrals I would like to call out. Mr. Hunter Schilling in Mr. Robinson's class for picking up trash, and Mr. Lucas Solorio in Mr. R's class for choosing to pick up trash at recess. Way to go, boys. We look forward to seeing you all on Monday. Have a safe and happy weekend. Reminder to teachers, we are out at Carline today to help because after school care is closed. So after school care is closed today, friends, so you are on the bus or you are a car rider.
Okay.
And lastly, in the season of giving, we are going to give out some extra blue ticket prizes. So if you hear your name, we drew your name out of our big bucket and you will get a blue ticket prize. Leo Mendez in 5th, Eleanor A. in kindergarten, Cameron Orner in 5th, William Baker in 4th, and Lincoln Schmitz in 1st. Congrats, we'll do this every Friday through December. Make it a great weekend.
So I have my pile of blue tickets that don't win for me. I turn those into the office. So I'm gonna turn this pile into the office. And if you did not get drawn, but you turned in a blue ticket this year, you might get drawn for the special ticket. Okay, so back to this. Why do you think that Minnesota has the laws that we have the season of fishing, the season of hunting? Think about the Ojibwe and Dakota, they can deer hunt at all times. They don't in the summer because they want the babies to grow up, but they could deer hunt in the fall, in the winter, in the spring. Can we deer hunt all in the fall, in the winter, in the spring? No, there's deer hunting season, right? There's duck hunting season, turkey hunting season. They don't have seasons. Why do we have these special seasons? Why do we have these special laws? Natalie?
To like keep the limit good or like
Yeah, we're limiting because there's more and more people have moved into Minnesota. More people are hunting. If everybody hunted all year round, is there gonna be a lot of deer left? No, they're gonna be all hunted up, right? We don't want to lose all the wildlife, the fish, the deer, the ducks, the turkeys, right? So we put limits on it. So people are saying, well, the Dakota and Ojibwe are doing it, that's gonna infringe upon all the animals. It's gonna take out all the animals. Are there a lot of Dakota and Ojibwe living in Minnesota? No, I don't know any. We'll talk about that later. Their number is small compared to the number of non-American Indians living in Minnesota. But Minnesota No matter what, even if there were a lot here, they have to abide by the treaty. It's legally binding. Eleanor?
So basically, the Dakota can fish and hunt in every season,
Uh-huh.
and we cannot.
Correct. And some people don't like that. They think it's gonna hurt the animal population. But unfortunately, 160 years ago, we said, you can do this. We said, you can do this in the treaty, and we have to abide by it. Adeline?
My brother like watches YouTube,
Mhm.
and like sometimes like if I glance over, he's watching like this like channel that's like about but like they went spearfishing in like the ocean. So is it allowed?
Minnesota is what we're talking about. Minnesota laws. Ocean is not Minnesota, so they have different laws and rulings. Okay, so in Minnesota, it's not allowed. But elsewhere, and I know people that have gone spearfishing and they use like harpoon guns and stuff. That's different. Okay, Bridget?
Like the spears that like you throw down, or like at the fish.
Uh-huh.
I've seen people use them.
Yeah.
Like, but then
So they might have like a special permit or something where people are exposed to the traditional ways, but as just a Minnesota citizen, you can't just go out and do spear fishing on your own. There's special things that you have to go through in order to learn about it and how to do it. So you might see it, and they might have been American Indians and you hadn't realized it because, you know, there's not that big of a difference to know who's American Indian and who isn't these days. It was different back then because people looked a lot different. Now, we all kind of look the same. Let's listen to this last bit.
The land changes hands. By 1853, the Dakota were living on the new reservations. They depended on the annuities promised by the treaties to support themselves. The U.S. government also set aside a portion of these payments for education programs designed to teach the Dakota to live more like European Americans. These assimilation policies created great conflict. Many Dakota wanted to live according to their traditional ways on their reservations.
We talked about that.
Almost immediately after the treaties were signed, tens of thousands of newcomers began rushing into Minnesota. During the next decade, some Dakota fought against government assimilation and loss of land. Over the next 3 decades, their Ojibwe neighbors also signed major treaties with the United States that left them with only a small fraction of their homeland. To men like Alexander Ramsey, this change reflected how things were meant to be. The treaties, he said, had removed obstacles that were keeping Minnesota from the lofty destination evidently reserved for her. In 1858, the new settlers would make Minnesota the 32nd state. Lost in all the American excitement over statehood was the fact that the obstacles Ramsey spoke of were people, the Dakota and the Ojibwe.
So it's super easy to see something from your perspective. They're excited, oh, look at Minnesota, it's such an amazing land, look at all the natural resources. It becomes a territory, now it's becoming a state. Oh, this is awesome. United States manifested destiny, we're moving along. Not so awesome for the Dakota and the Ojibwe, right? They lost all that land. Now they're living on the small reservation. The U.S. is saying you must assimilate. Not so good for them. So it depends on whose perspective you look at as to was this a great thing or not a great thing. So for question number 10, list 3 ways life in Minnesota was different in 1853 as a result of the treaties of Traverse des Sioux and Mendota. Life has changed big time by 1853. You look back 100 years ago, it was so different. Write down 3 ways that it's changed. Now the next section is in their own words. We do not have time to go through it in class. It is not on the comprehension page, but I found it super interesting because it talks about things, it uses primary sources, it talks about things from the Dakota perspective, from the newcomers, the settlers' perspectives, how they're viewing things differently. right? So it talks about all these different people and what they were feeling with all these changes happening. So I highly recommend you reading it, just because it helps you understand better what was happening. We are correcting this comprehension page on Monday. So one, you have to make sure your comprehension page is done. Two, remember our test is on Tuesday. You may want to bring your book home over the weekend to spend a little bit of time reviewing, so it's not all left for studying Monday night. Okay, so I'm not gonna make you bring your book home for the weekend, but think about it, well, you might want to. Michael?
So pretty much the last question is how it's changed from
Three ways that it changed. So what was different in 1853 than from before the treaties times? All right, if you are listening to this at home, I hope you are well, and I hope to see you soon. Have a wonderful day. In class, let's get out our assignment. Notebook.